When I first met Lucas, I didn't think much of it. Didn't see him as anything more than a distraction, a breath of fresh air in a life that had started to feel like wearing a dress 2 sizes too small, too tight around the ribs, too hard to breathe. Brian was working more and more by then, longer hours at the firm, endless late nights that left me eating dinner alone, scrolling through my phone just to feel like someone was still looking for me, still seeing me. Lucas was the kind of friend that slipped into my life like he had always been there. The kind who made you forget what time it was, who laughed too loud at bad jokes, who never seemed to mind when you needed to talk about absolutely nothing at all just to fill the silence. Brian didn't like him from the start. He smiled when I introduced them, shook Lucas's hand with that stiff politeness that said more than words ever could. And later that night, after Lucas left, he asked all the careful questions. Where did I meet him? How long had we been talking? Why hadn't I mentioned him before? I told him Lucas was harmless, a friend from my yoga class, someone who didn't even like women that way. That last part wasn't exactly a lie, or at least it wasn't a confirmed truth either. Lucas had never said he was gay, but he had that effortless, charming way about him that made it easy to believe he might be, if it made things easier. Brian didn't believe me. Not fully. He watched us the way a dog watches a closed door, ears pricked, waiting for something he couldn't see but felt in his bones. I brushed it off, told him he was being paranoid, told him Lucas was safe, that we were just friends, that sometimes it was good for a marriage when both partners had lives outside of each other, that he should be happy I wasn't sitting at home miserable every night while he worked himself into an early grave. I believed it when I said it, or I wanted to. Lucas and I slipped into an easy rhythm. Coffee dates after my spin class. Midnight movies when neither of us could sleep. Long drives to nowhere with the windows down and the music too loud. Sometimes Brian would call while we were out, and I would step outside to answer, forcing my voice into something light and casual, telling him I was just with Lucas, just grabbing a bite, just killing time until he got home. Lucas never pushed, never flirted, never crossed a line. And maybe that's why I didn't see the danger, because it wasn't a slow seduction, wasn't a line we tiptoed across. It was just comfort, just familiarity, just the slow erosion of boundaries until there was no clear moment when friendship turned into something else, something heavier, something inevitable. Brian's jealousy turned sour. He started picking fights when I came home late, started scrolling through my phone when he thought I wasn't looking, started accusing me of things I hadn't done yet, things I told myself I would never do. I defended myself fiercely, weaponizing Lucas's supposed harmlessness like a shield, screaming that Brian's distrust was ruining us, that he was pushing me away with his accusations. And in a way, he was. Every time Brian questioned me, every time he narrowed his eyes or tightened his jaw or threw out some half-formed accusation, it pushed me a little closer to Lucas, to the safety of someone who didn't expect anything from me except that I show up, that I smile, that I laugh a little too loud when he made some stupid joke about the barista messing up his coffee order. It didn't feel like betrayal. Not then. It felt like survival. It felt like freedom. It felt like the first time in a long time that someone was looking at me like I wasn't just a fixture in a house full of shared responsibilities and half-finished conversations. I told myself I was allowed to have friends. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong. I told myself a lot of things. And every time I said them out loud to Brian, watching the way his shoulders slumped and his eyes dulled with doubt, a small, poisonous seed took root inside me. The kind that grows in the dark, without anyone noticing, until it bursts through the floorboards and splits the whole house apart. It happened so fast I almost convinced myself afterward that it wasn't real, that maybe I had imagined the heat between us, the way his hands found my waist like he'd been waiting years to do it, The way I didn't pull away, didn't even hesitate, just melted against him like it was the most natural thing in the world. We were at a club with a group of friends, the music pounding through the floor, the lights spinning like stars in a sky that didn't make sense anymore. And somewhere between my second and third drink, I lost track of where the line had been. I just wanted to have fun, I told myself. Just wanted to dance and laugh and feel alive again. To remember that I was still young, still desirable, still someone who could turn heads when she walked into a room. Lucas wasn't even supposed to be there that night. He had texted me at the last minute saying he was bored, asking if he could crash our girls' night. I should have said no. I should have remembered all the nights I had defended him, all the times I had sworn to Brian that he was safe, that nothing would ever happen. But when I saw him walk into the club, wearing that stupid leather jacket and that easy, lazy smile, something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the drinks. Maybe it was the way the world blurred at the edges, the way the room spun a little too slowly, and the music seemed to pulse right under my skin. Maybe it was the months of loneliness finally catching up with me. The months of pretending that coffee dates and inside jokes weren't just placeholders for something deeper, something hungrier. Maybe it was the way he looked at me that night. Not like a friend, not like someone playing a role, but like a man seeing a woman he wanted and finally letting himself admit it. We danced for a while, too close, too slow, his hands lingering at my hips a second longer than they should have, my arms around his neck when the song didn't call for it. I laughed into his ear when he said something stupid, felt the heat of his breath against my skin, and didn't pull away. When the night started to thin out, when our friends disappeared into taxis and Ubers and the cool air outside hit my flushed cheeks like a slap, I didn't even think before grabbing his hand and pulling him toward the side of the building where the shadows swallowed us whole. I kissed him first. Or maybe he kissed me. Maybe we both just fell into it like we had been leaning too far forward for too long and gravity finally won. His mouth was urgent and messy and perfect, and my hands were in his hair, his jacket, his shirt, pulling him closer, needing more, needing everything all at once. He pressed me back against the wall, his hands everywhere at once, and I let him, gasping into his mouth, clutching at him like he was the last solid thing in a world that had come loose around the edges. There were people walking by, voices in the distance, the sharp smell of car exhaust and wet pavement, but none of it mattered. None of it was real compared to the heat between us, compared to the way my body responded to him like it had been waiting for this exact moment all along. It didn't go any further than kissing that night. Not technically. We pulled apart before it crossed the line I could still almost convince myself didn't exist. I stumbled into an Uber, laughing breathlessly, texting Brian that I was heading home, that it had been a quiet, boring night just like I had promised. I crawled into bed next to him an hour later, his body warm and familiar and unbearably kind, and I lay there staring at the ceiling, Lucas's taste still on my lips, my heart still hammering in my chest like a guilty drum. The next morning, I told myself it was a mistake, a one-time thing, the kind of thing that happens when you drink too much and dance too close and forget yourself for a moment. But somewhere deep down, deeper than I wanted to admit, I knew the truth. This wasn't an accident. This was a door opening. And once it opened, there would be no closing it again. After that night, everything changed between us, even though we pretended it didn't. Lucas still texted me silly memes and inside jokes, still tagged me in stupid social media challenges, still called late at night just to tell me about some ridiculous thing he had seen at work. But under all of it, there was a new tension, a current pulling us towards something we were both too weak to resist. The next time we met for coffee, we barely made it through the door of his apartment before I had him pinned against the wall, my hands tangled in his shirt, his mouth crashing into mine like we were starving for it. I told myself it didn't count, that it didn't mean anything because it wasn't love. It wasn't some grand affair filled with whispered promises and secret getaways. It was just need, pure and simple. A fire that burned too hot to control once it was lit. I told myself I could keep it separate, compartmentalize it into some hidden corner of my life, that I could still be a good wife to Brian, still be a good mother, still show up at soccer games and family dinners and neighborhood barbecues like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Every time Brian kissed me goodbye before leaving for work, I tasted guilt on my tongue. Every time Lucas texted me a simple question, "Coffee?" I said yes without thinking, without hesitation, knowing full well that coffee would turn into hands on my hips, lips on my throat, clothes on the floor before the mugs even had time to cool. It became routine faster than I ever thought possible. I would kiss Brian goodbye, drive across town under the pretense of errands or meetups, and end up tangled in Lucas's sheets. The hours slipping through my fingers like sand, leaving me breathless and raw and desperate to pretend I was still the woman Brian believed in. Then I would pull myself together, wipe away the smudged mascara, spritz on the perfume Brian had given me for our anniversary, and drive home, slipping into the role of dutiful wife without missing a beat. Brian kept asking questions, of course, kept raising his eyebrows when I said I was seeing Lucas again, kept sighing when I laughed off his concerns, kept telling me he trusted me while his eyes told a different story altogether. A story full of fear and doubt and heartbreak he was too proud to voice. "It's just Lucas," I would say, rolling my eyes, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand, forcing a smile that tasted like ash in my mouth. And Brian, poor sweet Brian, would smile back, would swallow his suspicions, would tell himself he was being paranoid because that's what love does. It blinds you to the most obvious truths. It makes you complicit in your own betrayal. Meanwhile, Lucas and I didn't slow down. If anything, we got reckless, emboldened by how easy it had become to lie, to steal time that wasn't ours, to pretend the real world didn't exist outside the walls of his apartment. We met at hotels sometimes when we wanted to feel like strangers again, when we wanted to pretend we were two people with no ties, no guilt, no consequences. We laughed in public, touched under tables, made out in dark movie theaters like teenagers daring the world to catch us. I lived for it. The adrenaline, the danger, the feeling of being wanted so completely, so hungrily, that nothing else mattered. And still, at the end of every day, I went home to Brian. Still kissed our son goodnight. Still lay in bed next to my husband, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, telling myself I could have both lives if I just balanced them carefully enough, if I just lied skillfully enough, if I just loved loudly enough to drown out the truth. But it wasn't balance. It was a free fall. And I was already too far gone to stop. Sometimes, late at night, I would catch Brian watching me from across the room, his face shadowed with something I didn't want to name. Something like realization. Something like goodbye. And it would send a chill down my spine so deep that even Lucas's hands couldn't warm it. I should have stopped. I should have confessed. I should have burned it all to the ground before it burned me. But I didn't. I kept lying. Kept pretending. Kept digging the grave a little deeper with every kiss, every lie, every careless whispered promise that meant nothing and everything all at once. Because once you start living a double life, it doesn't feel like betrayal anymore. It just feels like survival. I don't remember the exact moment the fear started sinking its claws into me, but I know it was somewhere between the first missed period and the third positive test. Somewhere between the nights spent staring at the ceiling, trying to do the math in my head, and the mornings spent forcing a smile across the breakfast table, while Brian told me how beautiful I looked, how happy he was, how perfect our life was about to become. He had wanted another child for years, had dropped hints and made quiet jokes about filling the house with more laughter, more chaos, more love. And now, when I should have been celebrating with him, all I felt was the heavy, choking weight of panic. Because I knew. I knew the timeline didn't add up the way it should have. Knew that there was a very real chance that the baby growing inside me wasn't his. It could be his. It might be. That's what I kept telling myself. But it also might not be. And that was the truth that wrapped itself around my throat every time Brian touched my stomach with that reverent awe only a man who believed he had created life could have. I didn't tell Lucas. Not at first. I didn't want to see the panic on his face. The way he would probably back away. The way he would crumble under the weight of something real and permanent. Lucas was good at stolen afternoons, whispered laughs, messy bed sheets. But he wasn't built for consequences. He wasn't built for forever. So I kept the secret, wrapped it up tight inside me, smiled when Brian told his family, posted carefully staged photos of tiny shoes and ultrasound pictures, let myself be swept up in the tidal wave of congratulations and advice and registry lists, all while a silent clock ticked louder and louder inside my head. Every doctor's appointment was a battlefield. Every look Brian gave me was a bullet. Every kind word from friends and family felt like a knife twisting deeper into the softest parts of me. Lucas didn't even seem to notice at first. He still texted me late at night, still sent pictures of things that made him think of me, still joked about running away together one day like it was something real, something possible. But when I started canceling plans, started putting more space between us, he noticed. And one night, when we finally met up after weeks of excuses, he looked at me across the diner booth, eyes sharper than I remembered, and asked, point blank, "Is there something you're not telling me?" I almost told him. I almost opened my mouth and let the whole filthy truth spill out between the half-eaten fries and cold coffee. But I didn't. I smiled, lied, told him I was just tired, told him it was stress from work, told him everything except the thing that would have cracked the fragile fantasy we had both clung to for so long. And maybe he knew. Maybe some part of him saw it anyway, but he didn't push. Maybe because he didn't want to know. Maybe because some lies are easier to live with than the truth. As my belly grew, so did the divide between the life I had built and the life I was destroying. Brian was over the moon, rubbing my back when I was sick, building a crib by hand, picking out names with a kind of reverence that broke me a little more every time he said our baby, like there was no question, no doubt, no darkness lurking behind the glow. And I played along. I let him paint the nursery. I let him buy the tiny clothes and the soft blankets. I let him believe he was bringing his child into the world. Because by then, the lie had become too big to escape. By then, I was trapped. There were moments, quiet ones in the middle of the night, when I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, one hand on my stomach, and wonder whose eyes the baby would have, whose smile, whose temper. I would imagine Brian's face when he looked at the baby, the pride, the love, and wonder if he would ever notice the difference, if he would ever look too closely and see the truth staring back at him. And every time the answer terrified me. Because if he did, if he ever realized, I would lose everything. Not just Brian, not just our home, not just the life we had built. I would lose the only version of myself that still had a chance at being forgiven. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time. The night our son was born, Brian cried. I had never seen him cry before. Not like that. Not the messy, broken sobs of a man who believed he was holding a miracle in his arms. He kissed my forehead over and over, whispered how proud he was of me, how beautiful I was, how perfect our little boy was. And I lay there, body torn apart, heart splintering with every word, smiling through the kind of pain no medicine could touch. I had done it. I had buried the truth deep enough that even I almost believed it wasn't real anymore. The nurses cooed over our family, friends sent flowers and cards and stuffed animals, and Brian barely left my side, beaming at everyone like he had just won the lottery. He didn't question the baby's dark hair that didn't match either of us, didn't notice the shape of his eyes that hinted at someone else's blood, someone else's story tangled forever into ours. Or maybe he did notice. Maybe he tucked the doubts away in some locked corner of his mind because the alternative was too unbearable to face. The weeks after the birth blurred into sleepless nights and endless feedings, Brian handling diaper changes and midnight bottle runs with a patience and devotion that shattered me a little more every day. Lucas tried to reach out once, a casual message asking if everything was okay, but I didn't answer. I couldn't. I knew if I opened that door even a crack, everything would come spilling out. Lucas didn't belong in this new version of my life. He was a ghost I had to exorcise if I wanted any hope of saving what was left. And for a while, I almost convinced myself it would work. I stayed home. I played the role of the devoted mother. I smiled at Brian's jokes, held his hand at pediatrician appointments, posed for family photos that looked perfect on the surface, and hid a rot so deep it made my skin crawl. We looked like a family. We sounded like a family. We moved through the world like a family. But inside, I was rotting. There were moments, sharp, blinding moments, when I would catch Brian looking at the baby too long, his brow furrowed just slightly, a flicker of something dark passing over his face before he smoothed it away. Moments when he would hold our son just a little tighter, kiss his forehead just a little longer, like he was trying to anchor himself to a reality he couldn't quite make fit. Moments when I thought maybe he knew, maybe he had always known and was choosing to love us both anyway, because the alternative was too devastating. Or maybe he didn't know. Maybe he just trusted me that much. Maybe that was the worst betrayal of all. I lived every day waiting for the axe to fall, for the shouting, the accusations, the DNA tests, the court dates, the wreckage. I flinched every time the doorbell rang, every time Brian's phone lit up with a message he didn't immediately show me, every time our son cried and I saw a flash of Lucas's crooked smile in his tiny face. But it never came. Brian never said a word. He just loved us. Quietly, steadily, unconditionally. And that's what broke me. Because he deserved better. He deserved a life that wasn't built on lies. He deserved a woman who didn't flinch every time he said, "I love you." He deserved a family that wasn't a carefully constructed illusion. But I wasn't strong enough to give him any of that. So I stayed. And I lied. And I smiled. And every night when the house was quiet and the world had gone still, I would lie awake next to him, staring at the ceiling, drowning in the truth that was too heavy to carry, too dangerous to confess, too woven into the fabric of our lives to ever unravel without destroying everything. Some sins stay hidden. Some lies become the walls we live inside. Some betrayals never see the light of day. And sometimes the cruelest thing you can do to someone isn't breaking their heart. It's letting them love you without ever knowing they shouldn't have.